Edge. This is episode number 4 now, on my look into why the Toronto Maple Leafs have not won a cup since 1967. And here we are on Maple Leafs Man Advantage. And we are in the 1964 playoffs with the Leafs. One thing I would mention too, a person I work with, Ken's his name. I directed him to my channel, and when he looked at me, I guess what wearing the shades, he said I looked like a hitman. So I might, go by Hawkeye the Hitman, I guess. But we are in the 1964 playoffs, and the Leafs finished in third place on a pretty good year. Pretty good season. Third in goals for and third in goals against, right smack dab, kind of in the middle there. But back then, it was the number one seeded team that would play the number three team. It wasn't 1-4, it was 1-3, and then 2 and 4 would play. So um, the Detroit Red Wings would end up playing the Chicago Blackhawks. The Blackhawks would get the home ice advantage, and with the Leafs, they would play the hated Montreal Canadiens, and they would have home ice advantage. The Habs would, as they were number one in the league. Uh-oh. Um, oh dear. So taking a look here, a little further look into the Montreal Canadiens. They have a very nice rounded offense going on there. They had five 20-goal scorers in Montreal. They were Jean Beliveau with 28, Bobby Rousseau with 25, Dave Ballon with 24, Gilles Tremblay with 22, and boom, boom, Bernie Geoffrion had 21. Three rookies to look out for in Montreal as well. There was Terry Harper on defense, John Ferguson, who was definitely a tough guy, and Jacques Leperrier. They all finished top three for the Calder. They were the top three rookies in the league that year, and Leperrier ended up getting the Calder Trophy. So those were three guys to look out for as well. They also had the Vezina winner in Charlie Hodge, who ended up being their number one goalie. I think after Gump Worsley blew a hamstring, I think, early in the season. It was actually against Toronto. I think it was late October that happened. So they had to turn to Charlie Hodge, and he became the number one goalie. And that was a good choice. He won the Vezina for them. He had 33 wins and a very nice 920 save percentage going for him as well. So they were playing Montreal, and the series they played went back and forth. As Montreal took the opening game 2-0, Hodge getting the shutout. Then Toronto won the second game 2-1. Low scoring affairs here. Then Montreal took game three uh, back in Toronto by a 3-2 score. And then game four, the Leafs won 5-3. Interesting, as the series progressed, the scores went up as well. Game five was back at the Montreal Forum, and the Habs took it by a 4-2 win. So the Leafs' back was against the wall. They couldn't lose another game, or they're out of there. Now, I was able to see Game Six, old black and white, CBC Hockey Night in Canada. I did see this game. Um, and it was the very first old game I saw when originally doing the blog about this. So it was really stepping into old time hockey here. And my thoughts were it was a good game. And man, oh man, was it ever different than the hockey we have nowadays. It was still very different than the hockey that I grew up watching in the 80s. Very different. I always give goalies props from back in the 60s and the 70s and earlier. Um, how they stood in the net with no mask on still mystifies me, and I find it incredible. I would never do that. At least I don't think I would if I was in their shoes or their skates. I don't think I was that good of a goalie, anyways, to even try that. But Johnny Bauer, who as I have said, I think he is the best Leaf goalie I've seen in doing this blog. I mean, he had a bunch of cups to prove it, but how he stood in that net with very little protection is really amazing to me. I can't believe they would take frozen robber off the chops like they did back then. It was quite amazing. Watching the game, I saw number 9 out there for the Leafs. And I was thinking, who is that? I don't remember who number 9 is. Well, that was Andy Bathgate, number 9 for the Leafs. Excellent. Another thing that was very different back then was if you had a draw in your own zone, it was the defenseman who would take the draw, not your center. That's interesting. For quite a while, it's always your centerman taking the draw, unless they're kicked out and then somebody else comes in, and then it's generally a winger that comes in there. But not then. So I saw the likes of, for example, Tim Horton taking a draw against Henri Richard. Pretty awesome in his own zone in front of Bauer. Interestingly, I mean, all the players um, should be playing defensively, but it's interesting if you lose the draw, the defenseman is right on the centerman, or should be right on that centerman if he plays it quickly in losing the draw. If that's what you want to do as a coach, if you teach everybody on the team defensive hockey, it may not be that big of a deal, but it's interesting how your defenseman is right on that centerman in that situation back then. On the Leafs power play in this game against Montreal, so the Leafs put out 5 forwards. Now I know Red Kelly was a defenseman before he came to Toronto when he played in Detroit. Uh, so it works perfectly. He knows he played many games on defense, so it works perfectly. I know last year, for example, Sheldon Keefe, who was the coach of the Leafs, now coaching in New Jersey. I think they're going to make the playoffs, by the way, New Jersey. They got a better team this year. Um, but last year, he would put out 5 forwards for the Leafs. I didn't like it. I don't know if I'm right or not in thinking it. It may not be, but it just seemed to backfire on them too often, in my opinion. Um, I didn't like how that was being used last year, in my opinion. But I liked it here in 1964 playoffs, and it really helps that Red Kelly had played defense, um, and certainly was a defensive-minded player. Not saying the Leafs aren't today, like Mitch Marner, is a very good defensive-minded player. Same with Austin Matthews, but I don't know. You can't really explain exactly maybe why I didn't like it, but it was used here and there. But anyways, on to back to the 1964 playoffs here. One thing I love seeing back in the game there that never happens today is the defensemen. As I was talking about, just looking down at their defense, you got Tim Horton, Alan Stanley, Bobby Bond, Carl Brewer, and in the playoffs it was Larry Hillman. Um, Kent Douglas was actually playing in the minors when the playoffs started, so I'm not sure if his game needed some improvement at that point, because Larry Hellman was in the lineup for the Leafs. But those guys there, they would, if you were coming into the zone as a forward or defenseman, anyone who has the puck bringing it into the zone, they would lay you out at the blue line. The defense was there. It wasn't, you know, leaning back on your goalie or waiting for you to come into the zone. They would try and close the door on you before you could get into the zone. Some of these guys laid out some wonderful hits. Yeah, you don't see that in the game anymore, and that's unfortunate. Um, yeah, but for example, I saw Tim Horton do it, um, and Bobby Bond do it twice in the 2 games I saw in the '64 playoffs with the Leafs. Those two there are great hitters. Um, Definitely among the greatest hitters that the Toronto Maple Leafs ever had. Right there, those two guys. One thing I noticed too in the game, there was only, I'm surprised there were, but there were two players wearing helmets in the game. One was Red Kelly. Now, the Leafs went on to win this game against Montreal 3-0 at the Garden, so they won at home. So it was back to the Montreal form for Game 7 in this back and forth series. But the Leafs came out victorious with their back against the wall, and they won by a 3-1 score. It was Davy Keon who was the man in this game. He was the guy who scored all three of their goals. Excellent performance it must have been for Keon there. So it was off to the finals for the Leafs again. Now for Montreal, Beliveau only played 5 games. So he must not have been 100% or he got hurt. He did play in the seventh game, but I am assuming he wasn't 100% there. And the Leafs held him just 2 goals in the series. Those were his only points. So that really helped Toronto out a lot. And I'm sure if you talk to a Montreal Canadian fan at that point, that might be what they would point to and saying, well, if we had a healthy Beliveau, it might have been different. But whatever, it's a physical game. It's hard hitting. There's going to be injuries, and the Leafs came out on top in this series at this point. Now, the Detroit Red Wings had their own 7 game series against the Chicago Blackhawks, and I'm sure it was a terrific series as well. Like Toronto, they had to win their 2 last games to advance. They took Game 7 at Chicago Stadium, the loudest building in all of the NHL. But they won by a 4-2 score. Alex Delvecchio had the game winner and an assist for the Wings to take that series. So the finals, 1964 finals, we had two tightly matched opponents. Um, Tight scores. So game one, Leafs took it at home by a 3-2 score. Game two went to overtime, and the Wings this time took it by a 4-3 score. Game three was at the Olympia in Detroit, and the Wings took the lead in the series, getting another 4-3 victory. Game four, the Leafs bounced back and won 4-2. So we're back to Maple Leaf Gardens, and the Wings won. They retook the lead in the series, winning Game 5 by a 2-1 score. So the Leafs' backs are against the wall once again. They got to win 2 games here to win the cup, or Detroit's going to take it. They're going to be the ones lifting the cup high and being ever so happy. Now, I was able to see Game 6. I actually have it in a DVD package that I have. It has all of like the best Leaf playoff games of all time. Uh, I know here comes the jokes, but there's not too many that are in the finals. This one was. So it's in the DVD package, and my gosh, it definitely belongs among the greatest Leaf games of all time. And those really should be for the finals. Those particular games, just in my opinion. But this one is it, and it is due to Bobby Bond. And he did more than this, but this game alone may be why he's going on the Leaf Legends list as well. What happened is he took a shot off his foot or his skate by Gordie Howe, and I'm sure he could let them rip, old Gordie. Bond was actually taken off the ice on a stretcher, which at that time may have been rather odd. There is no way on God's great green earth would a player come back and play after this because I'm pretty sure he broke his foot. His foot was broken. But minutes later, there's Bond on the ice playing with a broken foot. So it was in overtime. The Leafs and Wings are playing, and it was Bobby Bond who scored the goal to win the game, to advance to the seventh game, to keep themselves alive. And that was a Leaf moment to remember right there. Um, Definitely along with Bill Barilko's goal in 1951. Like it wasn't the game seven, but it was just, we are alive. We're still in this. Let's go, boys. It was a definitely a Leaf moment to remember right there. Then in game seven, it was back to the Gardens, and the Leafs ended up winning 4-0. Three of those goals were in the third period, so it was not a really a close score game. Andy Bathgate had the game winner in the first period there, and the Leafs would go on to win their third Stanley Cup in a row. And that's the end of the first season. That didn't take too long um, in this journey looking at the Leafs here. Now, looking at the stats in the Leafs of the 64 playoffs, Davey Keon led the way with 7 goals in just 14 games. Excellent job there. Excellent job as well by Frank Mahovlich. He led in assists with 11 and points with 15. George Armstrong led everybody in the playoffs with 3 power play markers. Bobby Pulford still at it. He led the league in the playoffs with 2 shorties. So I think he had 6 all year. Excellent job there by Bobby. And Bathgate and Hovlich led the playoffs with 2 game-winning goals apiece. And my favorite stat of all, just kidding. But it was Bobby Bond who led the playoffs. Everybody in the playoffs with 42 PIMs. Other players suited up in the playoffs for the Leafs that I haven't talked about. Jerry Amon, who had a goal, and future Hall of Fame coach Hal Arthur played at least 1 game in the playoffs for the Leafs as well. Yeah, and goaltending wise, Johnny Bauer was still the man. He played every second of the playoffs for the Leafs. He won all 8 games. He had a 2.12 goals against average. Uh, Really interesting because in the regular season, his goals against average was 2.11. It's like there was no change at all. And an amazing 935 save percentage, and he had 2 shutouts as well. And the Leafs won their third Stanley Cup in a row. So excellent job by these guys in winning their third cup in the 60s. One more to go in the 60s here too. But that's it. So if you like this video, don't be afraid to like it or subscribe. As I've said all along, I'm definitely planning on putting more videos on here about the Leafs and the journey into looking as to why or reasons why they haven't won a cup since 1967. And if you want to comment on anything, don't be afraid to do that as well. Just keep it family friendly. There could be kids on here, big time Leaf fans too. But that was a lot of fun. And until next time, go Leafs, go.